Hi and welcome to the second video. Let's start off by creating a project folder. I've already created a project folder. I named it course. You could name it whatever you want. This is going to be your project folder in which all your files are going to be housed in. Immediately after that, start by executing npm.init, and that's going to create your project configuration folder. It's going to be named package.json, and yeah, and as soon as you execute the command, you are going to be asked a couple of questions as to what you want to name the package, version, description. Just press enter, and just press enter unless you want to add that information. Immediately after that, you have your package.json file, and as I said, this is your configuration file. It has pretty much all the properties that Node.js needs to execute your project. Well, we did go with index.js as our main file, and this is the file that we're going to be executing, or the main file in this instance, right? So we named it index.js, but you can change it to like app or anything, or server, or anything else that you want. Just make sure that you remember that you change it here, and then once we create it, make sure that the name is exactly the same. After creating that, now let's install a couple of packages that we will need for our Node.js project. We will start by installing Nodemon, Express, and Mongoose. You could use the I keyword for install, and we'll install all these three packages. And here's a brief explanation of all these packages. So what is Mongoose? Mongoose is a data modeling library for MongoDB. Since it's a library, it provides a level of abstraction between Express and MongoDB. We don't have to deal with the complexity of creating and reading documents from the underlying MongoDB database. It provides assurance that all saved documents share a structure and contain required properties that reflect the database through the use of schemas. It has validation woven into it, thus you can validate data before interacting with the database. What is Express? Express provides a set of tools and features for building web and API applications. Express simplifies the process of developing web applications by providing a structured way to handle routes, middleware, and HTTP requests and responses. So when it comes to Node, every time you make changes to your application, you constantly have to restart your application. There is a library out there that simplifies the process of that. It's called Nodemon. So Nodemon is a utility tool for Node.js application. It helps streamline development process by automatically restarting your application whenever changes are detected in your source code. So this is really helpful because it will then limit the time that we constantly have to stop the application just because we had made a change. And this is really helpful for this project. Okay, now that all those three packages have been installed, there's a folder created for us called node_modules, and all those packages and all the content and all their folders, and they're all stored inside that folder, so don't delete that folder. You pretty much should know this because if you've been working with Node, so I really don't have to explain some of these things. So let's start off by creating a new file called index.js, and this is going to be our main entry to our project. Think of it as your main file, and this is the file that we're going to execute every time we run our project. In this file, we are going to be instantiating Express and running Express and starting the server from this file. Start off by referencing Express, and you could call it Express require, like that. Below that, let's create an instance of Express, since Express is going to be responsible for running our server. And below that, so let's go ahead and create a port. Basically, Express will need a port to run our application on. And then we're going to say app.listen in there, probably specify the port. Let's just run an anonymous function here that's just going to console log that the server is running, or let's just say listening on port, something like port 8080. Once we run our server, this text is going to be printed on console. So to run the project, just say Nodemon space and the name of the file, which is index.js, and there we go. It says listening on port 8080, which is the port that we're running our application on. Let's go ahead and check it out if we get any responses from port 8080. And if I run port 8080, we do get a response, but it's trying to, make a GET request, and it's not getting any responses from that, but we will fix that. We're now going to be creating our database logic. And one thing I like doing, and this is probably going to be the theme throughout the course, is that I like to separate my code. And this is probably known as separations of concerns. And what that means is that you separate responsibility into smaller or modular, maintainable, and easier to understand code. It makes it easier to understand. It's probably well defined, and you're isolating sort of like logical parts of the code into their own sections, so that you don't have clutter into your code and everything is well organized and readable. And if you ever find yourself working with other people and they then can understand that without things from different parts being in the same file, for instance, makes it easier to navigate. So let's go ahead and start with that. Let's create a new file called db.js, which is going to be our database file. We're going to say const, I'm just going to say Mongoose, and I'll just say require Mongoose here, require Mongoose. Below that, we're going to create a function called connect.db, and we're going to reference this function index.js in the index.js file, and it should be an async function. And just below that, I'm just going to export it quickly so that we may have access to it on the index.js file. We use the keyword async because we're dealing with the database, and if you don't know what asyncs are, just search them on Google or something like that. So we're going to start off by creating a URI string, which is your uniform resource identifier, and that's going to be our connection string to the database. We will set it up later on, but not now. And after that, let's say mongoose.set, run the set method, and in here we will have to then say strict, and then in here we will set and we will say strict query, and we're going to say false. So what strict query mode does is that whenever we execute our queries using Mongoose, such as find and update, and if there are any additional fields or any errors related to that, if we set it to true, then those errors will be, Mongoose will then throw errors, as opposed to when it's false and no errors will be thrown in that regard. So in this instance, we set our strict query to false so that we don't get the errors. But if you want to, you can put them up and it will show up every time there's errors. Okay, let's go ahead and insert a try catch block, and mainly because we're going to be interacting with the database in this block of code, and set up a console log if there's errors so that we may print them out on the console. Now let's say await .mongoose.connect. So we're now connecting to the database, and this is the method you use to connect to the database. And there we're just going to pass in our URI string. Now, while Mongoose in this instance then requires certain properties to be specified within the project, and I'll explain what these properties are. Let's start off by use new URL parser, and let's set that to true. And then below that, let's use unified topology, and let's set that to true. So the use new URL parser, what that means is that we're telling Mongoose to use the MongoDB driver's new URL parser, and it's used to parse and connect to MongoDB using the new connection string format. So this option then sets it to true because of different compatibility versions of MongoDB. That's why you then have to set that to true. For use unified topology, so this option enables you to use the new MongoDB driver, server, discovery, and monitoring engine. And I'd assume this is used to monitor the state of the MongoDB replica set or the server topology. So just set it to true. Basically, we're probably not going to be doing anything related to this. We're probably not going to be observing this at all. So, but just know that this was supposed to set these to true, and if you don't, MongoDB is just going to scream at you if you don't pass them in. Just going to console log MongoDB running, or just to indicate that the database is currently running and normal, or rather connected. And let me just fix this to message, save that, and let's go back to our index file. Let's now reference the database from here. So we say const db our database, then require a database file. And below that, let me just put a comment here to indicate that this is where we connect to the database. And now I'm going to say database.connectDB. Remember, that was the method, or rather function. As you can see, sort of ran it because Nodemon automatically just executes something when you save it. Executes the file, the project when we save it, so we don't really have to stop and restart the server. So it automatically ran it at the bottom, and it says that there we have a missing URI string, or connection string rather. We then, remember, we didn't specify it. Then this is where we're going to specify it. Get the connection string from the MongoDB database. Now I would ask of you to go ahead and install MongoDB Compass. There are tons of tutorials online that show you how to install MongoDB Compass locally on your machine, and that's going to be the application that's going to be running our database, and that's where we're going to be getting our connection string from. I will then show you as well how to get the connection string online using, I think it's MongoDB Atlas, and we're going to get the connection string from there later on. But for now, I'm going to show you how to get it locally if you're going to be running your database locally. And just after installing it, then return to the video, and I'm going to show you how to get the connection string. So okay, so this is MongoDB Compass, and immediately once you open it, the connection string is literally looking at you, right? It's that URI string. It even says they edit a connection string, so just go ahead and copy the connection string. But remember, it does not have a database attached to it. It just has the string, but I'll show you how to attach the database to it. And you probably might be asking, aren't we going to be opening the database and creating a database? Yes, you could do that. You can go ahead and open it up for yourself and create the database. But in this instance, we're not. And I'm going to show you how to do it. So once we specify it in our connection string and once we run our project, what Mongoose would do is that it would check if the database exists. If it doesn't exist, it will automatically create it for us so that we don't actually have to go through the troubles of creating the database. So it's automatically created. So do not stress about that. So now take the connection string, go back to the database file or the DB file, inside the quotation marks, then insert or paste the connection string, and after that specify the name of your database. In this instance, I'm just going to call the database course. You can name it whatever you want, doesn't matter, it's all up to you. And after that, just run the well, don't run it, just save it, and automatically it says there at the bottom that MongoDB is connected. That's the console log statement that we printed out to indicate that the application is now running. Now we've effectively run the application and we've connected to a database. It has created the database, in which I'll show you the database. And now I'm going to be showing you how to get the connection string from online using Atlas in this instance. So let's get the connection string from Atlas. So to use MongoDB Cloud, or rather online, go ahead and search for MongoDB online, register an account, and then from there create a project. I will link a video below as to how to set up the project online, and again for the video for running your database locally. So in this instance, well, after registering your account and creating a project, click on the project. Just open up the project. We are now opening up the project. So now that the project is been opened, just click on connect. From connect, click on drivers, and at the bottom, I think section 3 right over here, copy and paste this connection string. It has your username and your password section, so just copy it, go to your connection string over here, and now so now what you have to do is that now you have to insert your password. The password for MongoDB, and you should remember the password that you created. That's the password that you put in here. So yeah, that's it. So now insert your password. Now that you have inserted your connection string, you can now run the project, and now you've connected to the MongoDB cloud version instead of the local version. But for this project, I'm going to be running my project locally, and I would advise that you guys also run it locally, because I don't know if you're going to be having internet issues or whatnot, or connection issues. It's just, but depending on what you want to do, you could run it online. So it's not, rather do whatever you want, you know. So but for this project, my database is going to be run locally. Now that we've inserted our URI string into the code and the application works as expected, there's a concern of having things like passwords or tokens or URI strings for that matter in code, right? It's not typically done this way. In fact, it's not done this way, and we should not be saving our sensitive data this way. So the best way to do this is to introduce a environment file, right, which has environment variables, and this runs on your OS, on your operating system, as opposed to it being in your code. So whenever your code is compromised, or simple things, just even like having your code on like a Git repo that is, which is public, and you don't want to have such sensitive information being on your code. And again, one thing that Git does typically with GitHub is that it has your git ignore file, which then blocks the file from being pushed to any Git repository. So it's essential that you do have this env file. So we will then now instead save all our URI strings, passwords, and tokens in the env file going forward. So let's go ahead and create this file. So prior to creating the file, we have to install the .env package for Node.js. so that we could use the env file. So just execute npm i.env to install the package. So once the package is installed, so the very next thing is to then create the file. So name the file .env, which is our environment file. And in our env file, let's specify the name of the MongoDB URI string, right? Typically, we then tend to use uppercase letters to represent the URI string and other values that are going to be inserted into the env file. So let's specify Mongo underscore URI. Let's go back and copy the URI string, and then we have it. Specify the database. Don't forget the database. Let's specify the port as well. So I'm going to set aside the port 8080. Let's go back to the index.js file. I'll start with the database file rather. So in the index.js file, we are going to require the .env package or dependency, depending how you want to call it. And below that, say .env.config, then that will create the config for this env in this file. And let's go back to, and one thing about it is that once you have it required in the index page, and once you have executed the config function, then you can access the environment variables from anywhere in your code, or any file for that matter. So in this instance, we are going to say process.env and the name of our variable that we're looking for, Mongo underscore URI, and which is that. And now let's remove this port so that we then reference the port from the .env file, and just remove the port, this old port here. And I'm just going to say process.env, then the port. And then now the port from the .env file is the one. That's it. Let's just run this application to see if it runs. And yes, the application runs as normal. So now we've got our .env file, we've got our database running, we've set up Express as well, and we're good to go. And we have the basics to move forward in this application. So this is the end of this video. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.